You never needed bars. You've never heard the sound of a key turning in a cell, never felt the weight of handcuffs on your wrists, and yet you're imprisoned. Not the kind of prison you see in movies. No tall walls, no armed guards. It's silent, invisible, and maybe the scariest part, you call it normal life. You learn to smile when everything inside you was screaming, to look down when you wanted to speak up, to follow the script even when you knew it was a lie. No one forced you. They just had to convince you it was right, that being a good citizen meant not causing trouble, that silence was maturity, that emotional control was evolution, and so you thank them for it. This isn't about paranoia. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's about something you felt in your skin, but never had the words for. That feeling of always being watched, of measuring every word, of thinking twice before feeling, of apologizing for existing too much. You weren't born with this. You were programmed. The programming started early, in the looks that said more than words, in the stop crying that sounded like love, in the rewards for good behavior, in the punishments for being yourself. Every lesson was a line of code, every implanted guilt, an invisible fence wrapped around your mind. And today, you're serving a sentence you didn't even know was handed down. You look around and think you're free because you get to choose what to watch, what to wear, what to buy. But you don't see how even your desires have been manipulated, how your idea of freedom was carefully packaged and sold to you. Because when control is done right, the victim doesn't even realize they've been tamed. They believe they chose the collar. This video isn't a manual for escape. It's not a manifesto against the system. It's a mirror, an invitation, a whisper that says, look again. Because only those who can see the bars can choose to break them. And what you're about to see could change everything, or it could change nothing. It depends on how many layers you're willing to peel back. But if you've made it this far, it's because something deep inside you is already starting to wake up. The story begins with a lie, one you've been told your entire life, that self-control is a sign of evolution. Let's dig that idea up. Let's see where it came from and why it became one of the most effective tools of silent domination. You were praised for staying in control, for not reacting, for keeping your composure. They told you that was maturity, that the world needed balanced, centered, conscious people, and you believed it, because it sounded right, because it sounded noble, because no one ever told you the cost of silencing your own soul. From an early age, you learned that feeling too much was a problem, that showing anger was immaturity, that crying in public was weakness, that wanting what you shouldn't was a sign of deviation. Slowly, emotional control became an ideal, an altar, a life goal. But no one told you that more often than not, what you called evolution was just repression. This so-called conscious self-control wasn't born within you. It was installed, like a silent app running in the background, a filter that judges your impulses, that edits your thoughts, that erases your reactions before you even notice them. What seems like a choice is actually conditioning, a learned reflex, a fear disguised as wisdom. When you stay silent, it's not because you understand, it's because you learn that speaking up brings punishment. When you accept, it's not because you forgave, it's because you believed that resisting meant losing everything. When you distance yourself from those you love, it's not always clarity. Sometimes it's because you learned that closeness is dangerous, that vulnerability exposes you, that showing what you feel is giving the enemy ammunition, but what they sold you as virtue might have just been submission, not to another person, but to an entire system of beliefs, expectations, and invisible codes. You were shaped to appear calm while bleeding inside, to smile while imploding, to applaud while silently dying. That's the first step of the prison, making you believe that silence is strength, that suppressing your feelings is intelligence. that becoming harmless is the only way to be accepted, and so you adapt, you trim yourself down, you shrink until you become the model citizen, the one who never causes trouble, never confronts, never truly lives. There were no more guards, no more screams, no more chains. Just you standing before yourself, watching every step, every word, every thought. The fear no longer came from outside. It had been transferred, installed like a lens over your own eyes. And you began to observe yourself as if you were the enemy. Michel Foucault called this the panopticon, a prison where the inmate never knows if they're being watched and so behaves at all times. A surveillance structure where the mere possibility of being seen is enough to shape behavior. But what was once a physical design became an internal prison. Today, the panopticon no longer needs watchtowers. It lives inside your mind. School taught you this through subtle rewards and punishments. The workplace reinforced it with targets, evaluations, and conduct policies. Your family did it through pride and disappointment. The media through likes and cancellations. And now, even when you're alone, you act as if someone is watching. As if every gesture must be approved, as if every thought could be used against you. This isn't just about behaving well in public, it's about how you think when you're alone, how you judge your own desires, how you edit your own existence. The control was so well executed that you no longer need explicit rules. You've already internalized them. You already censor yourself. And the most perverse part is that this control comes with praise, with recognition, with a sense of belonging. Because the better you adapt, the more you're rewarded. The more efficiently you mold yourself, the more you're applauded. The prison became an emotional meritocracy, and surveillance, a way of life. You're not alone. Millions live under the same spell, believing they are free because they chose to obey. But that choice was made inside a conditioning field, where the fear of being judged outweighed the desire to be authentic, where silence was learned as survival, where the ideal behavior was crafted by hands you've never seen. There's a voice inside you. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten, it simply whispers, with authority, with conviction, with the weight of everything you were taught to respect. That voice judges your thoughts before you even understand them. It disapproves of your impulses with surgical calm. It corrects you, even when no one's watching. Freud called it the superego. But what few people realize is that this structure isn't just psychological, it's political. The superego is the internalized echo of authority figures. It's built from everything you absorbed as right or wrong, good or bad, allowed or forbidden. It was born from your relationships with parents, teachers, religious leaders, cultural narratives. But today, it carries much more than childhood morality. It carries the control blueprint of the society you were shaped by. This voice updates itself. It feeds on media, social networks, and the role models you consume. It judges through a moral lens designed to keep everything running, predictable, orderly, quiet, and you, even without wanting to, obey. Because that voice doesn't sound like an enemy, it sounds like conscience, like responsibility, like wisdom. But sometimes it's just the invisible hand of a system that doesn't want you to question. How many times have you hesitated to follow a legitimate desire because something in you said it was wrong? How many times have you apologized for feelings no one even saw, but you felt ashamed just for having them? The superego acts like an internal courtroom, but the judge inside wasn't chosen by you. This structure is useful, it organizes, it civilizes, but when it becomes a tool of domination, it paralyzes. It turns human beings into self-correcting mechanisms. It makes you police yourself, punish yourself. Thank the system for keeping you in line. And that's when power wins, when it no longer needs to be enforced from the outside, because it was installed from within. From a very young age, you learned that certain feelings were unacceptable. There was no manual, but there were signals. Anger was condemned with looks, desire was covered in shame, frustration was treated as weakness. And so, you began to hide parts of yourself. Not because you wanted to, but because you understood the world wouldn't tolerate them. The pain didn't come from what you felt, but from what you had to repress in order to keep being accepted. Guilt in this system doesn't arise naturally. It's constructed, engineered, refined. It's not enough to feel something deeply. You must also feel guilty for having felt it. You don't just get frustrated. You judge yourself for being frustrated. You don't just desire. You feel ashamed of the desire. This second layer is the most effective. It turns any human impulse into a personal flaw. This engineering is subtle. It comes wrapped in noble values. You believe you're being ethical, when in fact you're internally mutilating yourself. Culture tells you to master yourself, that good feelings build and bad ones destroy. But who decided what's good? Who profits from an emotionally castrated population? Who benefits from individuals who feel guilty for being human? Emotional repression doesn't make you stronger. It makes you more obedient. It distances you from yourself and pulls you closer to the ideal model of behavior, one shaped by interests that aren't your own. When you feel anger, something inside tells you it's wrong. But what if that anger was valid? What if it was a sign that something needs to change? The system doesn't want you to hear that. It wants you to feel guilty and stay silent. The cruelest part is that you don't just accept this dynamic. You thank it. You believe you're purifying yourself, becoming better. But what's really happening is that you're drifting further from your real self. You're disciplining yourself to fit into a mold that was never made for you. You're punishing yourself for something that was never a mistake. It was just too human. Imagine millions of people living under the same invisible code, people who smile out of obligation, who apologize for existing, who hide behind routines, duties, and masks, not because they want to, but because they've learned that being authentic is dangerous. What looks like a civilized society is sometimes just a crowd of repressed souls. Self-censorship is no longer just an individual act. It has become the social glue. It keeps everything running, without noise, without confrontation, without truth. When everyone represses themselves at the same time, chaos disappears. But along with it, so does courage, critical thinking, and the inner fire that could change something. The price of order has been a collective renunciation of one's own voice. In the name of coexistence, progress, and stability, we've learned not to make waves, to swallow discomfort, to deny inner revolts, to accept injustice as part of the game. And all of it seems reasonable, seems mature, but it's just the reflection of a culture that molded the ideal citizen: obedient, predictable, restrained. This massive restraint produces an effect that's both silent and devastating. People become caricatures of themselves, men who don't cry, women who don't scream, young people who don't dream too big. And so, humanity turns into something lukewarm, without friction, without truth, all to preserve the appearance of harmony. But harmony here is not the meeting of differences. It's the standardization of fear. And the more we silence ourselves to fit this model, the more we become complicit in a logic that does not serve us. No revolution is possible where the shame of feeling rules, where silence is mistaken for ethics, where peace is merely the absence of conflict, not the presence of justice. The same society that applauds absolute self-control is the one that fears the awakening of consciousness. Because when voices break free, when bodies stop asking for permission, when thoughts become wild again, the system trembles. And that's why it teaches you from early on that silence is a virtue, that adapting is strength, that questioning makes you a problem. There comes a moment when something inside you refuses to keep accepting, a moment of strangeness, of friction. as if suddenly you realized that the thought holding you back, it isn't really yours. That guilt consuming you didn't originate from within. That voice judging you was implanted. And that's when the cell begins to crack. When you identify the inner jailer, something changes irreversibly, because you're no longer just living, you're observing, you're questioning the script. You're looking at the reactions that always felt natural and asking, where did this come from? Who planted this idea? Who benefits from this fear? That gaze doesn't erase the pain, but it starts to set you free. True freedom doesn't begin with shouting, it begins with silence. A silence that isn't submission, it's listening. You start to hear your deepest reactions. You begin to notice the patterns. You begin to realize that much of what you thought was you was merely the reflection of the voices that shaped you. And that awareness, though painful, is the beginning of autonomy. It's not about blind rebellion. It's not about breaking everything. It's about reclaiming what was taken. The right to feel without guilt, the right to desire without shame, the right to exist without asking for permission. Identifying the jailer doesn't mean destroying everything. It means redirecting your gaze, repositioning your soul, rewriting the pact you made with yourself, back when you thought you had to obey to be loved. The key was never in someone else's hands. It was always with you. But the system made sure to distract you, to exhaust you, to entertain you, because it knew that if you ever stopped, if you ever looked inward with courage, something would awaken. And awakening isn't loud, it's intimate, silent, but once it happens, the world is never the same. The digital prison isn't just a technological structure, it's a state of consciousness, a way of existing, a habit of silencing yourself before even trying. But from the moment you see the game, it loses its power, because you stop being a character and finally begin to become the author of your own story. You were never alone in the cell, but you learned to act as if you were. You learned to measure your gestures, control your thoughts, correct your instincts. And when someone asked if everything was okay, you said yes, because that's what was expected, because that's what kept everything in place. But deep down, something in you always knew. There was something wrong with that normality. There is no greater revolt than realizing the prison was built with your own bricks, that the limits surrounding you were imposed with promises of love, respect, acceptance, that the voice saying you can't isn't yours, but speaks with your mouth, that the guilt paralyzing you was taught as a virtue, and that the peace they sold you comes at the cost of your authenticity. This video didn't bring formulas, it didn't offer easy exits, because truth here isn't an answer. It's an open wound, a broken mirror, a whisper that insists there is more. More than control, more than silence, more than forced perfection. Freedom isn't about screaming, it's about feeling without fear, being without molds, choosing for real. You were programmed, but now you know it. And that awareness is already a rupture, because a prisoner who understands the mechanics of the cell is no longer the same. He observes differently, he feels differently, he begins, even if silently, to rebuild himself. And maybe this is the final question that remains. If today you had to start from scratch, without the codes, without the commands, without the judgments, who would you be? The prison only works as long as the mind accepts it. And yours just began to doubt. Nothing has changed out there. The world keeps spinning. The rules are still the same. The voices still try to shape you. But something shifted inside you, and that no one can undo. Because once you see the mechanism, it no longer works the same way. It creaks, it reveals its artificiality, it loses power. Now, every move you make carries a different awareness. Every silence comes with a question. Is this truly mine, or was I taught to be this way? And even if the answer doesn't always come, the mere act of asking is already an act of freedom. Because the greatest gesture of resistance is remembering that you still have a choice. This isn't about destroying the world or abandoning everything. It's about looking inward with courage, honoring what you feel, reclaiming the dignity of existing without filters. Because when an entire society goes silent out of fear, every awakened voice becomes unbearable to the system. You don't need permission to be whole. You never did. But now, maybe, you know that. And that remembrance might just be the beginning of everything they once tried to erase.